Okay, welcome to Piping Hot with the board. I'm Rachel Swanson, joined by Alta Sparling, and we are here today to talk about Gen Z beauty trends and how norms are being reshaped. As I said, my name is Rachel. I run Method and Mode, a full service research and customer insights consultancy, uh, work in beauty, wellness, fashion, and media. Alta, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, and I've had the pleasure of working with Rachel, who is so talented and amazing in the customer insights. So can attest to her work. But yes, my name's Alta. I work as typically a fractional marketing leader in beauty and some apparel. I've done some apparel in my time, but really focused on brand and growth strategy for emerging brands in the beauty space. So really excited to be chatting about this topic, which is I feel like very hot right now, very relevant and very exciting.
Yes, and it's like bringing our conversations to everyone. As you know, and as other members of the board know, and maybe some of you watching know, I recently did my own little study on Gen Z and different trends in the wellness and beauty space, how that's intersecting with politics. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was that despite kind of the thread or the trend of folks in the media saying that the youth are depressed and disaffected and don't know where to go. We found that most of our Gen Z respondents are ambitious, confident, and opportunistic. And those were words they used to describe themselves. They are main character. They're ready. They're ready to attack the world, even though they're in their early 20s. They have this real healthy self perception. So I thought that was super interesting and kind of a counter narrative to what we hear. Alta, you've worked with so many major brands in fashion, beauty, emerging brands as well. You have such a pulse on what the younger customers are doing. What role do brands play in supporting this kind of best life or main character energy that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's so interesting because this Gen beauty kind of trend, it's really not about aspiration, it's about this declaration, which I think is so interesting. And we could spend a whole podcast talking about how that's different from like our upbringing, sort of like our coming of age. But I think what's been really unique about brands in this is really acting as the vehicle for the self-expression and sort of like being a little bit the backdrop so that main character energy can really kind of flow through. But it's just been so cool because what we see and what we're leaning into is allowing people to be a little bit more experimental and finding what their signature routine looks like. One of the brands I work for called Dead Cool, which is a functional fragrance brand. We want people to experiment and mix and match and come up with various combinations of scent that like make them feel like themselves. But we're just the vehicle for that, right? We don't tell people what the perfect combination is or we don't direct that. We let them play. And I think that's one of the places that brands are going is sort of just like creating the forum or the platform for that experimentation.
Right, right. And meeting those consumers where they're at too. I think you and I talked a little bit about how like there's a mental health component
Yeah.
that's, always been a through line with beauty, especially, but now even as things get destigmatized and, like you said, self-expression, uniqueness, it's all kind of a piece that the beauty world specifically really helps people kind of find who they are and project that to everyone.
Totally. Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, honestly, I feel like there's so much more of this empowerment to be who you are. And when we see about, how beauty brands are sort of putting that narrative out into the world, you see it even down to the nitty gritty of like how they're packaged, the packaging, the box, things are just louder and brighter, a little bit more inviting, a little more fun, which I think is meant to, again, all to insinuate the fact that like, this is your place to play. This is your place to be. It's not about being quiet. It's actually about being really, forthcoming in who you are. And again, declaring that you are there and that is actually something to be proud of, which is
Right, right, right. And I think also something you mentioned, like our upbringing without us mentioning ages, but I think,
yeah.
the
Please don't.
concept, so like the concept of like the scent shelf or the scent library, which now
Yes.
has kind of morphed into beyond that, it's layering to really
Yes.
create. And I know you know a lot about this, but talk to me more about how that really, comes into play with the work that you're doing, and why that's so important to Gen Z.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. It used to be that you would sort of have your just like one primary signature scent. And we all remember, I mean, a lot of scent is around scent memory and what that, brings up for somebody. I remember that my mom wore, an Issey Miyake fragrance. Like I'll remember that for the rest of my life. I remember what it smells like. And so it does like kick up, that connotation of who she is. But now it's a lot about how does my very specific layering combination, whether it's Issey Miyake plus a totally different brand, bring my specific energy forward of this day, like of this particular day on April 17th, right? Like it's less about this sort of like must have same signature scent every single day for the rest of your life. It's a lot about how you lean into your outfit. If that's a vibe and what that brings you in. Therefore, like, I'm going to do a combination of this scent and this scent, or maybe 3 or 4. And so it's cool. And it does give the consumer, I think, something to talk about and share with their friends, and be like, oh, today I'm wearing blank, blank, blank. And that actually has become sort of a topic of conversation. And then it spurs further creativity and sort of experiment around, oh, well, maybe I should try that combo or what. So it's just been really interesting to see how that layering and the truth of like layering different scents on top of each other or totally different fragrances has become more the norm versus this one fragrance for the rest of your life, which I feel like was very much our kind of our time, if you will.
Right. And I love how that it becomes part of the conversation and it's unique to me, but then it's also fueling content, right? Because then you're sharing it and you're talking about it. And it's almost like, I feel like another area we see this too is skincare, right? Like everyone has their routine of what they do morning, afternoon, during the day, nighttime, and how we've talked about like that's, everyone has seen this, the stats about how the tweens are in Sephora and the drunk elephant is like the #1 thing for 10-year-olds. But there's this idea that anti-aging is not really the thing anymore, right? Like it's really, kind of this idea that it used to be, skincare and beauty to a large extent was about enhancing and then maybe fixing. And now we're kind of in this prevention mode. I think like, I think you mentioned this, like, it's not in their vocabulary, this idea of anti-aging. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it just goes back to this idea of how we take care of ourselves and what that, again, sort of projects out into the world. If you're doing things, in a preventative sort of getting ahead of it way, that says something about who you are in terms of, your almost self-respect. And you're seeing a little bit more of that. And again, it all plays out into this declaration of who I am and why I respect my body or, respect sort of my, my being. But it is really interesting though, because it has broken down so many of what we would say sort of faux pas in and around Botox. And again, not to bring it back to our generation, but like there was a long time where I think people didn't want to share that they even did Botox because they were a little bit, shy around that and knew that that could drum up some judgment. And this generation, again, not shy, I don't want to make blanket statements, but I think there's less of this sort of like quietness and more about, no, this is how I am taking care of myself. And this is why and I want to get ahead of it. So
totally. Well, and we saw in my study, about a quarter of our Gen Zers are either actively or planning within the next 6 months to start using Botox. It's part of this like early tapping into the fountain of youth where I feel like anti-aging conversation, it's not even about anti-aging anymore. It's not even about fountain of youth, which is how a lot of beauty used to be sold. It's just the pipeline is there and they're tapping it earlier. So it's flattening in some ways the generational divide when it comes to aesthetic and, perfection and just, presentation, which is so interesting. And I think you see that in other studies as well, that folks across the spectrum from 20s to 40s feel that all beauty brands are for them. There's less differentiation about feeling like this brand's for me, this brand's for you, and this brand's for later in life, which is so interesting.
So interesting. And as a beauty marketer makes it hard, right? Because it used to be very easy to be like, okay, we're going to be talking to this group about this topic, and again, I'm sort of fading myself because that feels like marketing a long time ago. But, if I were to give some sort of advice to marketers out there today, especially, if we're talking skincare more specifically, it's all about how to protect your youth. And it's about like selling longevity. Don't say the word anti-aging. Honestly, I think that already is like gonna date somebody or feel antiquated. So I think it's a lot about this, again, preservation, protection. Like those are sort of the active verbs that we want to be leaning into. And then again, don't want to make it scary. It still needs to bring in that space of fun and, you know, bringing that expression and being who you are. But it's going to be really interesting to see how marketers start to change the verbiage and sort of the rhetoric, if you will, around just anti-aging in general.
Awesome.
Well, this went by really fast. I feel like we could have unpacked a lot more about the fountain of youth and what's going to happen after everybody's gotten Botox.
Absolutely.
And they're going to be like, what's next? But this was really great, Rachel. And, you know, again, thank you so much for, you know, producing such an insightful research, paper to let us have this conversation and dig in deeper.
Amazing. And thank you to the board for having us on Piping Hot. See you guys next week.
Thank you.